To create a blob storage or a file storage, the first thing that we need to do is to create a storage account. Now, in my previous video, I had shown you how to create a free storage account because Microsoft offers up to 100 GB of a file storage for free and up to 5 GB of blob storage for free for a year. So if you have recently opened your Microsoft Azure account, you are eligible for these free services. If you are not, you can click on storage accounts from your dashboard, or you can search for storage accounts and start creating a storage account from here. But let's say that you have created your Azure account within a year. What you can do is you can go back to the home page and you can search for free services. And you can see a bunch of free services that Azure offers for up to 12 months. I can create an Azure file storage or an Azure blob storage. So let's click on create and create a storage account. So the first thing that we would need to do is to select a subscription. My current subscription is the only subscription that I have. So I shall select pay as you go. And let's create a new resource group because I do not have any existing resource groups. And I will select one for this example as storage account. Let's select a storage name, KZCC storage. I would put this in the region that is closest to my users. So for this example, I would leave it as default. For the performance, you have two options. You have either standard or premium. The recommended option for most scenarios is the general purpose V2, and I shall leave it at that. For redundancy options, I would change the redundancy to locally redundant storage for this example. The other three options I have explained in another video, and I highly recommend that you watch that video. And click next. In the advanced options, you can select the security settings that would impact your storage account. So the first setting would be require secure transfer for REST API operations. What does this mean? This means that any request that is coming from HTTP and not HTTPS will be rejected. Moving on to the next option, allow enabling public access on containers. By default, blob containers do not permit public access to their content. This setting allows authorized users to selectively enable public access on a specific container. Now, if you would want to enable public access on your containers, then this option needs to be checked because by default, blob containers do not permit public access to their content. Moving on to the next security setting, which is enable storage account key access. Your storage account can be accessed through access keys and shared access signatures. Now, if this option is unchecked, then any user that has a shared access key will not be able to access the storage account. If I click on this information, what it says is when storage account key access is disabled. So when this is disabled, any requests to the storage account that are authorized with shared key, including shared access signatures, will be denied. Anybody that has a shared access signature will also not be able to access the storage account. I recommend that you keep this tick on. Moving on to the next security option, which is default to Azure Active Directory authorization in the Azure portal. This setting is not checked by default, but if you check this setting, then when you upload a blob or a file, by default, it goes into the Active Directory authorization. To make things easier, I have this article opened where there is an upload blob window, and the file that is uploaded is hello world text. And you can see that the default authentication type is Azure Active Directory user account. So when you check this option, the upload is automatically defaulted into Azure Active Directory user account. Moving on, let's leave the minimum TLS version at version 1.2. Let's scroll down to blob storage. There are two settings that you need to take note of. One is the allow cross-tenant replication. This option allows you to copy your blobs or replicate your blobs to another storage account on a different tenant. If this option is not checked, then your copy operations are limited to the same tenant. Moving on to the next setting, which is the access tier. You have three options generally, but two options are set on the storage account level. And one option, which is the archive option, is set on the blob level. Any file that you save will be defaulted into either hot or cold as you set it up. So if you want your storage account to be accessed frequently on a daily basis, then you would select hot. But if your files are accessed once every 3 months or once every 6 months, then you would select cool. Please note that you can also set this option on a blob level. Over here in this example, the user is trying to upload a file called helloworld.txt. There is an access tier option. By default, it is hot. That does not mean that you cannot change this file or this blob to cool. So I can set it on a storage account level as a whole, or I can set it on a blob level per object wise. So moving on to the next Azure file setting is you can enable large file shares up to a maximum of 100 TB, but you cannot convert the storage account into a geo-redundant storage offering. And the upgrade is permanent, means you cannot change this setting once this is ticked. So I click on Next, which is my networking tab. And over here, I have three different options to access my storage account. You either enable public access from all networks. So over the internet, anybody can access your storage account, which is highly not recommended. Enabling public access from all networks might make this resource available publicly. Unless public access is required, we recommend using more restricted access type. The second option would be enable public access, but from selected virtual networks and IP addresses. Now I've created a separate video where I show you how to create a storage account on a private network and a public network. The third option would be to disable public access and use private access. For this, I would need to create a private endpoint. Now, what is a private endpoint? So if I open this link over here, a private endpoint is nothing but a network interface that uses a private IP address from your virtual network. And this network interface connects you privately and securely to a service that is powered by Azure Private Link. And in this case would be your Azure storage. If I open this link as well to make things clearer, you can use a private endpoint for your Azure storage account to allow clients on a virtual network to securely access data over a private link, which is your Microsoft backbone. The private endpoint uses a separate IP address from your VNet address space for each storage account service. Network traffic between the clients on the VNet and the storage account travels over the VNet and a private link on the Microsoft backbone network, eliminating exposure from the public internet. So for this example, I would leave it at enable public access for all networks. The next option would be to select your network routing. Now, this determines how you route your traffic as it travels from the source to its Azure endpoint. Microsoft Network Routing is recommended for most customers. Now, the difference between Microsoft Network Routing and Internet Network Routing is explained in this link, which I shall attach in the description. To make things easy, for example, if a user in Singapore tries to access Azure resources that are hosted in Chicago, then the traffic is entered into the Microsoft Global Network in Singapore and then travels on the Microsoft network to Chicago. Now, if you use routing over the public internet, what happens is if a user from Singapore accesses Azure resources hosted in Chicago, then traffic travels over the public internet and enters the Microsoft Global Network only in Chicago. So the difference between Microsoft Global Network and the public internet is that traffic travels over the Microsoft Global Network. As you can see in this example, that when the user in Singapore tries to access in Chicago, it goes over the closest point of presence in Singapore, travels over the Microsoft network to Chicago, whereas in the public internet option, the traffic travels over the public internet and then enters the Microsoft global network only in Chicago. I hope this makes it clear. Let's click on Next for data protection. Over here, I have the option to enable soft delete for blobs, soft delete for containers, and soft delete for file shares. Now, what is soft delete? If I delete a file from my storage account, it puts a delete marker saying that this file has to be deleted within 7 days permanently. The file is not deleted. The file has a delete marker on it, and after 7 days, that file will be deleted permanently. So you can change the setting to as many days as you want. I can also enable versioning for blobs so that you can revert back to the same blob if your blob was modified or deleted. But there are a few things to take into consideration. If I open this link, and over here you can see that each write operation creates a new version. If I make a change, it modifies the file into a newer version. Now, having said that, having a larger number of versions per blob can increase the latency of blob listing operation. Microsoft recommends maintaining fewer than 1,000 versions per blob, and then you can use a lifecycle management to automatically delete old versions of the file. So lifecycle management is nothing but a policy or a group of rules that says that after 10 days, delete this version of the file, or after 20 days that this file has not been modified, delete this file. So you can set different life cycle policies on a blob or a file so that it doesn't expand your storage and you're not paying for stuff that is not used. Moving on to my example, I click on Next. And over here, I select the encryption type as Microsoft Managed Keys. I can also select Customer Managed Keys, but since I don't have any Customer Managed Keys for this example, I'll leave it as Microsoft Managed Keys and click on Tags. If you have any tags, you can put them here. I have my department, and I can say that my department is Finance. So this storage account belongs to the Finance department. And I click on Review. It's running a final validation. And once my validation has been successfully completed, I can go ahead and click on Create. So my deployment is in progress. And once this is completed, I will come back to this example. So now my deployment is complete. Let's click on Go to Resource. And on the overview page, I can see all my settings that I had just created. So for example, I can see that my versioning is disabled, my blob soft delete is enabled, my container soft delete is enabled. So whatever settings that I had put while creating my storage account is on the overview page. So these are the simple steps that you need to follow while creating a storage account. In my next video, I shall create a file service and a blob service. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.